This is the first issue of the Great Basin Naturalist, published in 1939. And the authors in this issue are Vasco Tanner, who was the editor for the first 30 years of this journal, and Wilmer Tanner, who published a paper with his brother. And if you read through here, it's great stuff. There's an article on spadefoot toads. Anything you want to know about spadefoot toads, it starts right there, right? And there's an article about rubber boas. You may not know what those are, that they're a cool snake that's poorly known, and there's an article about reproduction in rubber boas by Vasco and Wilmer. And so part of my understanding of the world, and part of what you'll see tonight, has to do with people who largely did their work before I was even born, including the Tanner brothers. I did find out, though, that Wilmer published his first paper in the Great Basin Naturalist in this first issue, 1939, and he published his last one in 1999. That's 60 years that he and his brother Vasco published in here. So there's a lot of tradition there about the natural history of the world and the things that are available to us when we go out in the world there. I then went on, as I grew older, I would write letters to professors or to state wildlife agencies and ask them about things. I have a copy of a letter from Louisiana about the possibility of ivory-billed woodpeckers still existing in the United States that was dated in the 1960s, because I wrote them a letter and asked them about that. And I went on to the university and met people who made a big difference, and Clayton White and Hal Black are here tonight, and Jack Seitz. I was in a herpetology class with Jack, and we were just talking about, we went down to Lytle Ranch. This would have been in 85, I think, somewhere around there in 1985. And we went down and we camped out and we just spent like 3 days chasing lizards around, and it was great. It was great fun. We had a good time. And Dwayne Smith and others, who, many of whom have retired, and then my current colleagues, many of which are here now, and the things that I learned from them, and the things that I learn each day as I go out and study that. So I'm very grateful for those people who took the time to teach a person who didn't know a whole lot about the natural world about those things. And I've had lots of experiences that started because of people who were willing to sort of share that information, and whether that was by people who were long gone by the time I got here, their observations are still recorded in the published literature, or whether it was people who I get to visit with every day. Brock McMillan's here, and others from the department are here. And sometimes when we do our work, we meet in the hall and we say, do you know what I found? Do you know what I saw today? Do you know what I found today? Riley Nelson stops into my office, Riley Nelson, stops into my office every once in a while, and he says, guess what I saw today? And we have these great conversations. And so that's sort of an ongoing thing. You'll kind of get a flavor for that as we go through this. The title of this talk that I chose is called A Lifetime of Days, and that comes from a quote by Annie Dillard that I'll share with you in a bit. But I want you to think about sort of what that means in the context of the second part here, how fishes can save your life, right? That's a bold statement. I want to start out with 4 thoughts, and the first one comes from the Doctrine and Covenants, section 59, 18 through 20. And every class, I teach a basic biology class, I teach teach with Jack Seitz, a vertebrate zoology class and an ecology class, and all my classes have to memorize this scripture because I think it has some important points in it that helps us understand our relationship with the natural world. And so notice that in verse 18 it says, all things which come to the earth in the season thereof are made for the benefit and the use of man. And then notice that the first thing it says is to please the eye and gladden the heart. That just makes me happy by itself, right? That's why all that great stuff is out there, is mostly to keep us happy, right? Mostly to keep me happy, I think, because there's lots of fishes that I'm the only one that knows about them. And for food and for raiment, taste and for smell, yes, but to strengthen the body and enliven the soul. When's the last time, I know Larry St. Clair, I know lichens enliven his soul, because I've talked to him about it. And they make him happy. I'm not quite sure how that happens with lichens, but I understand the process a bit with fish, right? And then it says, And we'll get to this kind of later in. And it pleaseth God that he hath given all these things unto man, for unto this end were they made to be used, with judgment, not to excess, neither by extortion. So we're going to talk a little bit toward the end about what it means to use our natural resources with judgment. So these are sort of the important kind of take-home points that, as I read through this, I want you to kind of remember as we go through these things. The next quote comes from Charles Darwin. We can't have a talk about diversity without talking about Charles Darwin. And this is a quote from his Origin of Species. There is grandeur in this view of life with its several powers having been originally breathed into a few forms or into one, and that whilst this planet has gone cycling on according to the fixed law of gravity, from so simple a beginning, endless forms most beautiful. I really like that. I like that writing and I like that thought. Endless forms most beautiful and most wonderful have been and are being evolved. So keep that thought. We have the opportunity to study about endless forms or endless variety. And it's here mostly to make us happy. Here's the third quote, and this is where the title comes from. It is dire poverty indeed when a man is so malnourished and fatigued that he won't stoop to pick up a penny. But if you cultivate a healthy poverty and simplicity so that finding a penny will literally make your day, then since the world is in fact planted in pennies, you have with your poverty bought a lifetime of days. It is that simple. And that's where the title comes from, is that if those things of the natural world, and here likened unto finding a penny, those little things, the things that you see, the things that you learn about, the things that you discover, if those things make your day, then because there are endless forms, as Charles Darwin says, endless species, there's endless variation out there, then you have with your poverty or with your appreciation, with your ability to observe and see those things, you have bought a lifetime of days. Now put that together with this. This is one of my favorite comics and it says, notice that in the first one, is the coast clear? Give me a boost. What's the plan? We wait for Susie to walk underneath this tree and then we drop the water balloon on it. That's a great plan. And what if she doesn't walk by? Then we just sit in the tree all day. Hey, that's a good plan, right? And so Hobbes says, I love summer. And here's the point. Calvin says, yeah, the days are just packed. What does he mean by that? The days are just packed. It means that out there there's so much variety and so much waiting for you that the days are just packed. Every day contains an opportunity to learn about the beauties of nature and the wonder of things that are out there. So I'm going to use, most of my research has to do with fish, and I'm going to use studies from the fishes, and some of this is my own research, and most of it is other things that people have discovered or found out along the way. And I'm going to talk to you about how your days can be just packed, right? And not just one day, but a lifetime of days full of study and learning and understanding and appreciating and enjoying the natural world and the endless variety that's out there. And so there was a video series, some of you will recognize this title, called The Trials of Life. And they divided this up and showed lots of neat video. But I organized this talk around sort of three of what you might consider are the trials of life. All organisms must find enough food or enough energy or they die and they don't pass on their genes. While doing that, they have to avoid becoming food themselves, right? You have to avoid predation long enough that you can reproduce. And so the final point here is finding a mate and reproducing. And I'm going to use examples from the fishes to show you the endless variety that is available and things that are surprising in the uniqueness of the solution to these trials of life, to the things that all organisms must solve, that all organisms must do in order to persist in the environment. So I'll start with the idea of finding food and talk about adaptations in fishes that allow them to find food. And we think of this as relatively simple. We live in a privileged generation when our main problem is not enough food, at least in this country. It is too much food. So we don't think about this a whole lot, but for most organisms, this is the activity that consumes most of the day. I'll start with the sharks. when you talk about getting food, you have to talk a bit about the evolution of jaws in fishes. And of course, fishes were the first vertebrates and the first vertebrates with jaws. And so we have to talk about the jaws, because if you didn't have limbs, I always challenge my students, I say, go to the cougar eat and figure out how much of what you eat you could eat if you didn't have limbs and you just had to kind of pick it up and eat it the way that fishes do, right? They can't manipulate, they can't grab things except with their jaws. And so this is a white tip reef shark that we did a dive down off the coast of Costa Rica and took these pictures, and Russ Rader, who was with me, swam up to this shark and grabbed, we actually have a picture of him holding the tail, right, of these sharks are about 6 to 7 feet long, and holding the tail. And I wasn't that brave, but we did get a picture of it, right? It might have been the last picture of Russ, so you have to take those pictures, and I'll tell you a little more about those people. Here's a brief study in shark jaws. Shark jaws come in a variety of forms depending on what the organisms feed on. And we're very familiar with this group in particular that have the big saw-like teeth on them. These are jaws that are built for cutting chunks and biting things that are larger than you. One of the biggest problems that most organisms face is many organisms can't bite off pieces, but they must swallow things whole. And so you see that's like this fish-eating shark here. And you know it's a fish eater because it has these long pointy teeth that are good for grabbing, but they're not good for cutting. They're good for holding until you can swallow things whole. So this is a fish eater. This is a mainly mammal eater, the great white here, with these big jaws here and cutting chunks. And so immediately we see that jaws, as they evolved, we see this development of jaws that become movable. And so sharks, partially, as you can see in this picture right here, can, when they lunge for prey, their jaws are only loosely connected to the rest of their head, and those can shoot out and protrude beyond and get a bigger bite, as it were. An interesting side note is this little guy right here. These are called cookie cutter sharks. I went to the American Society of Ichthyologists and Herpetologists last summer, and they had a talk about divers that had been bitten by this shark right here. Adult size is about this big. And what these sharks do, you'll notice these top teeth are very needle-shaped, and they will grab in. They usually attack large things like whales or other things like that. They'll grab in with the top, and then they use this. Look at that. That's a row of saw-like teeth right there, and they'll scoop out a round hole about this big, and that's what they swallow. And so they eat a meal every so often, and this row of teeth breaks off, and they swallow that with every meal, a new set of teeth for every meal. Many sharks, their teeth, they have rows and rows of teeth that are, you can kind of see in this picture, they have rows and rows of teeth that are in behind these teeth that lay out here. So a shark in its lifetime can go through up to 20,000 teeth. No dental bills. It's a pretty good deal. So that's, along at about the same time that sharks were evolving these sorts of jaws, we see massive armored fishes like Dunkleosteus here, and some of the other large fishes. This is my wife here with the Smithsonian. My wife Laura, and here's a big fossil fish, huge fishes that have big teeth on them. So the evolution of jaws in the bony fishes were similar to this. We can see that. And we have the many forms of very long nose. These are the gars, long noses, needle sharp teeth, and they'll swim up and then they jerk their head sideways and grab this way. That's the way they feed. And there's a lot of similar patterns of convergent evolution in things from the mammals. The porpoises have a similar sort of plan. We see lots of that pattern. The ichthyosaurs, the plesiosaurs all had a very similar pattern. As if that wasn't good enough, in the bony fishes we have the development of a similar thing to what the sharks have. These are the red piranha. These are red piranhas that Jack and Riley Nelson we went down to Trombetas in Brazil, up a river for seemed like 12-day boat ride, but it took one night. And we got up there and we caught fish all the time. And these are the famous piranhas that were dead on the dock. Where's Riley? Hold your hand up, Riley. That's the finger right there. And see, this is the picture I took, which is perfectly acceptable. But no, Riley wanted the bottom ones turned the same direction as the top ones. And he reached down, and it was probably this fish or this one here. I don't know which one. But a piranha can bite, even after it's laid on the dock for an hour. We tested this scientifically. It can bite, and it has a faster reflex than your blink reflex. And you know how fast our blink reflexes are. And so those fish, and bit a nice little horseshoe-shaped piece of flesh out of his finger. And I heard him yell, and I saw the fish going that way, and I saw blood spurting this way. Great stuff. Fish jaws and good things. And even more interesting forms, all the bill fishes, you'll see some of these upstairs, but they use this bill. And when they get in a school of fish, it's hard to catch an individual fish, but they will swipe sideways really fast, and they'll hit a fish and injure it, and then they can go pick it up. And that's what they use this bill for. So the evolution of jaws follows this. Well, the advanced bony fishes have done one better, and that is they have this advanced fish jaw, right, where this is the premaxilla and the maxilla here, and these two are loosely attached. So that when the mouth is closed, it sits back tight against. But as they open their mouth, that premaxilla will shoot out and it increases that vacuum force. And I want to show you this. This is a sling jaw wrasse, and this is one of the best examples of how good these jaws got. And so I want you to watch this. This is in slow motion from Peter Wainwright's lab. He does fish morphometrics kind of stuff. So watch this. Have you ever seen jaws like that before? That is great. It happens one more time. Watch this. Notice, you don't even know this because the mouth doesn't look that big, but look at how that premaxilla extends way out, right, and propels out. And you can see the suction that goes along with that in the other. This is called a sling jaw wrasse, and that's one of my favorite examples of how efficient that jaw gets in the bony fishes, right? They have a very good system. So sling jaw wrasses, they can extend that jaw out 30% the length of their body. Think about the utility of this at like Chuckarama, right? Worked pretty good. Okay, continuing on with that are many of you have heard of the archer fishes. Archer fishes have a modified jaw, and they pull in water, and then they spit that out in little streams. And not only are they really good at long distance at knocking terrestrial, mostly arthropods off, and then they go feed on them, but their vision is also extremely good as well because they have to see not only through the water as they come up, but up through the air. And so they have good vision and good aim. This would be similar to you when you get in the shower and you notice that spider in the corner. If you were accurate and could knock that spider off at 6 feet, that's about the equivalent of what they do there. My kids try this after I tell them they try that, but so far haven't been successful. This is talk about how organisms find their food. This is the electric eel, and we were on the same trip when we were down in Brazil. We were in a murky sort of a backwater of the main river, and we were down there at night, and we were hand grabbing the little dwarf caiman. They'd get about this big, and we'd go around, we'd shine lights, and we'd grab those and then hold them up, and we found lots of different fishes and frogs and a host of different things. Great time to be out at night. And I was standing on the edge about knee-deep in water, and I noticed this pair of eyes coming toward me, and it was coming like this, and it had a ruby red eye shine, just a beautiful eye shine. I thought, what in the world is that? It's not a caiman because they have orange eye shine. So I stepped out of the water first, right? And then I shone my light on. And it turned out it was about 3-foot electric eel. And there were several of them there. And they will go around, and not only do they can they generate an electrical charge to find food. They'll if they get in close to fish, they'll release that electrical charge, and it stuns the fish that are close to them, and then they can go feed on them. But they also sense electromagnetic radiation, right? They can sense. So all of your muscle movement has to do with electricity, right? It's translated into electrical pulses, and the sharks have this capability as well. So you can't hide from sharks whether you want to or not, right? You may as well just give up if they come by. And the electric eels are that way as well. They can sense living things because of the electrical current in them, and then they can feed on those. There's a whole host of what are called the weakly electric fishes. These are two species. This species is described down there, and these are about this long. These are some of the weakly electric fishes. Their whole body here, here's the eyes, here's the operculum, so the gills sit right in here. The mouth is that big. They feed by being head down, and they pick up little, I think they're called ice flies or glass flies or something like that, the larvae down in the bottom. But notice these fishes with their tail, they taper off to a long pointy tail that would be over here somewhere if I got it all in the photo. And all the internal organs sit right inside here. Right? That much is taken up by the internal organs. Everything else is this electrical generating organ, these muscles, and you can't feel that when you go in there, but this is the way they communicate. They don't have good eyesight, they can communicate that way. And this turns out is a new species, and we haven't been down there. We were down there in 2000, and we haven't been back. In order to describe a species of electric fish, you have to record their electrical wave signal. That's what differentiates species. That's one of the easiest ways, because those are species specific. And so this is a new species, but we haven't been back down to record that, and we weren't able to do that at the time. But we had a lot of fun down there scooping them up. This is one of them, and when we talk about how fishes sense their food, this is that's sometimes called a pencil catfish or a kangaroo. And they sense X currents of water being jetted out mainly from fish gills, and then they will swim up inside those fish gills. They're only about this big. And they'll swim up in there, and they'll bite off parts, and they suck blood. They have a very simple digestive system, no convolutions or anything in it. It fills up with blood, they digest that, and then they go looking for another meal. Periodically, these fishes, and in fact this one that I took a picture of right here, this one is in the museum in Manaus at the university there. And periodically, if people are swimming in the water and they urinate, they will swim up the urethra and cause a very painful condition, known because they have backward facing spines here. And so these are fishes that are more feared. Yeah, lots of you are squirming for some reason. And these fishes are more feared than the piranhas, because piranhas mostly will leave you alone. And these are something else, bloodsuckers. Endless forms. Okay, so if that's how fishes find their food, then let's talk a bit here about how they avoid becoming food and the adaptations that they show in doing that. First of all, many fishes avoid becoming food for something else by getting big, right? You just outgrow everything that's out there to eat you. And so this is the giant Mekong catfish, the big sturgeons that you can find in the Columbia River, white sturgeon. And this is the big mola mola or ocean sunfish. From fin to fin, these will get up to about 15 feet long and from fin to fin, and I've watched these. I've seen them during El Nino years. These will come up as far as Alaska with some of those warm currents, and you can see them. They float along. They eat mostly jellyfishes. They'll dive down deep and feed, and then they come up and they'll lay on the surface, possibly to get rid of parasites, because when they lay on the surface, the gulls will come down and pick the parasites off of their body there and feed on them. So one way to avoid getting eaten is to become large. A second way is, if you can't get that big, then you have spines like this bluegill here. They have spines here, here, and up on top. And so notice the very flattened side-to-side body. You'll see that in several of these other species. And then spines that poke out from there. And the lionfishes, this is a red lionfish, they show these adaptations better than most, they go one step further. They have long spines, and each of those spines have a toxin in them. So if something tries to eat lionfishes, then they encounter these toxic spines that keep them from being eaten. Notice how brightly colored this fish is as well. If you have toxic spines, you can be just as bright as you want to be, right? Some fishes use camouflage to avoid having predators find them. And this fish is about 3/4 of an inch long. This is a juvenile fish of some of the large fruit-eating relatives of the piranhas that will get about this big, right? And they have very good flesh, but when they're small, when you're small, everything is happy to eat you, right? And so what you'll notice here is, notice the edges, the margins. This fish, when you see it, they're floating along, and their behavior also, they'll lay on their side and float like a piece of degrading leaf, and there's a lot of that in the Amazon. And this looks just like a piece of leaf that's beginning to mold around the edges. And notice that even these irregular edges here, you don't see that characteristic tail fin. And if you just look at that dark part, you don't see these transparent parts. It looks just like a piece of leaf that's floating along there. And then as they get larger, where fewer things can eat them, then they change from this form into a more recognizable and distinct form. These are great fish. We caught these in the same marsh where the electric eel was. And these are the genus Carnegiella, sometimes called hatchet fishes or something like that. Is that right, Riley? And they're called that because of this big extension down here. And there's a muscle that comes down from this fin. You see this fin bowed up here. And when a predator comes to feed on them, they jump up out of the water, and they will flap those fins and skitter across the top and avoid being eaten by the predators. And these are common aquarium fish, but you don't get to see that behavior unless you go and see them in their natural environment. And you could sit there in the afternoon and you'd watch, and these fish would jump up and skitter across the top, and you'd see them go. And when we tried to seine them up, they'd escape the same way. But we caught a few. These are fishes, some of my favorite fishes from Costa Rica. Bruce Chapman, where's Bruce? He was in Costa Rica with us on one trip, and we study these fishes. These are the live-bearing pisciliids. This is the Brachyraphis rhabdophora. This is the male. They have internal fertilization, and the females here are always larger than the males. And these fishes adapt to predators in the environment or to high mortality rates by changing their whole life history. So when they are in the presence of a predator, if they live in that environment, then they mature at very small sizes. They put lots of energy into reproduction because they're not going to live very long. And it turns out that they change, the size of their offspring is much smaller, many more offspring, but they're individually much smaller. And they can persist by sort of out-reproducing the predator because they grow up and reproduce fast enough that the predator can't eat all of them, right? There's two other species that appear to have evolved along that same continuum. So there's Brachyraphis roseni here that is a specialist in large river predator environments, and Brachyraphis terabensis here. All of these are very small fishes, kind of related to the guppies that you have in your aquaria. And they've evolved to those predator environments. And you can see this female these are embryos right here. She'll get this dark spot. She's about to give birth to those. This is a male roseni down here. So if we then shift over and talk briefly about this third of the trials of life, about finding a mate and reproducing. So finding energy and avoiding becoming someone else's energy, that's cool enough. But wait till you see what they do about reproduction. This gets even better. So we'll start once again with bluegill, which I really like because I studied bluegill for my PhD dissertation. And so in some ways I owe maybe even my job here to bluegill, right? Because they provided this dissertation and I came and gave a talk and things worked out and here I am. And so I like bluegill for lots of reasons. I like to eat them, I like to catch them, but I like to talk about them because this is a big male bluegill here. And you can see the bright color, and males make nests, and you can see some other males around here. They nest in colonies. Males dig out a nest, and then females come in. They sidle up to the male. If they choose that male, they mate with him in his nest, and then he defends the eggs and the fry for several weeks until they hatch, until the fry get on their own and move out. So he's a pretty good, what's called a parental male. But some males in the population never grow this big. A big male bluegill will be that big. Some males become reproductive at about that size. And so how can a small male compete with these big guys? Well, what happens is they have what are called alternative mating strategies. So when they hide around here in this vegetation, and when a female comes in to spawn with that male, they come in on the other side, kind of hiding, like, oh, don't mind me. And they spawn with that female the same way. And so their genes are carried on in the same way. And so we have these mixed populations of males. And you often have, this is not, it's been shown in bluegill. That was one of the classic species that it was shown in. But there's many other species that show this same variation in alternative mating strategies. As if that wasn't good enough, I've been diving down on the islands off the coast of California, what I'm thinking of here, Catalina Islands. And you'll find, off the coast of California, you'll find, these are called sheep's head wrasses, and the males will be about this size, and they will be black and have this red saddle over the top of them. And the males guard a harem of females, up to about 10 to 15 females, and he has exclusive mating rights for all those females. The females will be smaller, and they're kind of a peachy tan color, a single color all throughout. So they will all mate with this male. Well, if you go fishing and you catch that male, then the largest female undergoes spontaneous sex change and becomes the male. Her color changes, her head shape changes, her ovaries turn into gonads and into testes, and she mates then with all of her former harem mates as a male now, because she gets to mate with all of them, so she increases her reproductive output. Think about that next time you eat a fish. Right? The clownfishes that you are all introduced to by that great documentary Finding Nemo, the clownfishes turn out to be, not surprisingly, that documentary has a few minor errors in it, and not surprisingly, as it turns out, the male and female will live in an anemone, and females are larger than males. The female lays the eggs, the male fertilizes them, and then he tends those eggs very carefully, because he wants to, if he doesn't do a good enough job, then the female will sometimes chase that dominant male out. And there are many smaller males hanging around down here, just sort of waiting for their chance. And they will grow rapidly, get to a larger size, and they will become the dominant male in the system. None of them are related. But if the female gets killed, like it did in this documentary I told you about, if the female gets killed, what does the male do? He undergoes a sex change and becomes the female of the anemone. And the next larger male down there becomes his permanent mate. And the offspring that are born leave the anemone. They never stay in the same anemone. They leave and swim out through the open ocean and go and colonize other anemones. So not only did he not need to go find his son, but he would have been a she when he did so. And it wouldn't have mattered, because he just should have stayed there and had another batch of eggs. That's what he should have done, right? But it would have made for a short movie. So anyway, there we are. Clownfishes, well named for a variety of reasons. As if that wasn't good enough, right? It gets even better. These are deep sea anglerfishes, and they come in lots of forms. And one of the key things, you know these are deep sea fishes because in the deep sea there's not a lot to eat. And so the trend for evolution is to evolve very large jaws so that you can eat whatever you come in contact with. And then the rest of your body is kind of small, like it is here. So the jaw structure goes all the way back through here. Large stomach, this one has fed recently. You can see it there. These are mostly head. And notice this female, here's the vertebra that come down, but she's about half head right here. Well, if it's hard to find food in the deep sea environment, it's even harder to find a mate. And so juvenile male anglerfishes have a couple of patches on their face, and they have a very good sense of smell, and they swim through until they smell a female. The female exudes sort of a pheromone of sorts, and then when they follow that trail until they find that female, and then they open their wide toothy mouth and they permanently bite the female and attach permanently. The circulatory systems fuse, the female provides all of the sustenance that this male, this one has two, here's one here attached to this one, and they regress, their tail, their fins, their eyes, most of their structures go away, their testes become larger. They become sort of this appendage of the female, because if you have the good luck of finding a female once in your life, you had better not let her go, or you may never find one again. The male then gets the rest of his lifetime paid for by the female because she pumps nutrients into that male via a placenta-like structure that develops. And the male pays for that, right, because he is no longer in control. Some of you know what I'm talking about. And so these are obligate male parasites, obligate sexual parasites. They stay there, they are paid for by the female, but the female controls them. So when she's ready to lay her eggs, she sends a hormonal signal down, the male's testes enlarge, and they exude sperm as she lays her eggs, and that's how you procreate in the deep, dark sea, right? Okay, let me talk to you a little bit briefly about the African cichlids, right? The variation there. First of all, there's great variation in coloration and pattern in these cichlids. Here's 4 different species. These in particular, many of them have these egg spots on their anal fin, and they induce females to lay their eggs by sort of saying, oh look, I've already got a bunch of eggs here, yours will be safe if you lay them here as well. But then these are the special group of cichlids called the mouth brooders, right? And so they turn around after the male has spawned or extruded the milt and fertilized the eggs. Then mostly the females, but in some cases the males will turn around and they will gather all those eggs into their mouth. And then they swim around with them. They don't eat anything else. They swim around with them for days to weeks while those babies hatch. The babies will then swim out of the mouth, but if they're threatened by a predator, they'll zoom right back in, as you see in this picture right here. And so they protect them, their mouth brooders, they protect them there. A good example of parental care. Anytime there's the evolution of a unique solution for parental care, there's the downside of that, and this fish is called, these are called baby eaters, or sometimes called baby suckers, and they have this, they're relatively larger, they have this upturned mouth, and they will, you can tell a mouth-brooding cichlid because it has a, you can see the patch down here is sort of distended, and they will zoom up to them and ram them right in the bottom so that they spit out their babies. And notice this upturned mouth, and look at this, here's the premaxilla and the maxilla, that's really good, and they'll just suck those up from underneath the mom as they do that, and so that's how they make their living. All right, so if there's mouth brooders, there's baby suckers to go along with it. All right, these are another group of live-bearing fishes called the surf perches. And the surf perches are, this one's about to give birth here. They're kind of like the pisciliids or the Central American fishes that I showed you. The cool thing I wanted to tell you about these is, this is the black surf perch. This is the least surf perch, black surf perch here. And the black surf perches will, they show this large adult parental males, but also some of those males are sneaker males, like the ones I described to you in bluegills. And they do this even better than the bluegill do. Some of the males that are born from these females will be reproductively mature the day they're born. And they will go off searching for females to mate with the day they're born. They're born sexually mature, they go through that whole development. The adults are about this size, they're about this size, and they go searching for females to mate with the day after they're born. Male seahorses, you know this story a little bit. The males take the eggs from the female, they put them in this brood pouch, and then they give birth to those after they've developed. So male seahorses show a great amount of parental care, and it's almost always the males in the seahorses and the pipefishes, the related pipefishes there. And finally, to conclude this segment, the Amazon molly. These are all female species. There are no males of this species. They were created by the hybridization of 2 bisexual species. The Amazon molly, though, unlike some lizards, which are true parthenogens, these require mating with one of the parental male species. The the sperm is required to trigger the development of the eggs. These are live bearers. Trigger the development of the eggs, and then it's kicked out and not used further. It doesn't fertilize the eggs. And so they do have to mate with one of the parental species, so they can't occur on their own. They do have to be with one of those parental species. But it's a species an all-female species, appropriately named the Amazon molly, right? An all-female species that has been around for a long time and appears to be a fairly stable system. Okay, so that is the sort of the whirlwind tour of how fishes make me happy, right? And the cool things that they do, and the seemingly endless variety. There's just a few examples there. There's many more things. We could talk for a lot longer, but I could talk for a lot longer. You may not be able to listen much longer. So I wanted to end with this discussion, a bit of a discussion about this idea about we should use these things. This endless variety is to be used with judgment, not to excess, right? So a few facts here. Freshwater fishes are one of the most endangered of vertebrate groups. Our rate of altering marine and freshwater habitats and of exploiting fish for food has dramatically increased in recent years. We are going to greater lengths finding more fish out of the sea and exploiting those at higher and higher rates. And also, climate change and massive levels of pollution are causing changes in the environments of fishes that some of them will be able to respond to and some will not. So there's a biodiversity crisis of sorts that's developing with fishes. And many of those that I showed you have the possibility of not being around for very long. And let me give you a few that are important to us for a variety of reasons that are threatened. The bluefin tunas, first of all, the largest tunas, the most perfect fish in the world by some accounts. Bluefin tunas are built for speed. They will get up to 10 feet long, packed, dense, good eating flesh. A single individual bluefin tuna goes for tens of thousands of dollars on the Japanese market, right, for sashimi. Right, you get the good stuff, and they are worth enough that they can employ spotter planes, people to fly over in planes. Then they come down with helicopters and harpoon the large ones and take them back. You know how much helicopters cost. They can harpoon those, they can take them back ship them all the way back, fast freeze them, ship them all the way back, and still make a profit on these giant bluefin tunas. In your and my lifetimes, those will be. There's been talk about removing them, but the nations can't get together, removing them from commercial fishing. They will certainly become functionally extinct, if not really extinct, in the next few years, because we will eat all of them. Orange roughy, how many of you have had orange roughy? Orange roughy came on about 20 years ago or so, and it was this new, really good tasting fish, and it was replaced a lot of things. They went out among these big seamounts and found lots of these fish in huge numbers. They're very deep. You can tell by the big eye and the large jaws. They're very deep water fishes. A big orange roughy will be about this size, and we ate a lot of them. They were trawled up, and they were really good tasting. They preserved a long time until we found out that an orange roughy, this one up here, is probably 70 years old. And the oldest are 100 years old. So we're catching fish that are 100 years old and cooking them up and eating them. And you know enough about sort of basic population growth to know that that's not going to be a sustainable fishery, right? So what we've been doing is just sort of vacuuming the orange roughy up with this idea you can't replace a 100-year-old fish in a couple of years, right? It takes 100 years. So orange roughy. The cod, the Atlantic cod, one of the greatest or worst stories, depending on how you look at it. The Atlantic cod was probably the most abundant in terms of biomass, the most abundant fish in the oceans. Huge schools of them. They scooped them up and scooped them up and scooped them up and argued between Canada and the US and other countries about how many they should scoop up until in '92, we caught almost every single last one. Right? They became commercially extinct and the population crashed and there just weren't any left. We had caught them all. And now they've spent, since 1992, the last 19 years, they've spent trying to figure out how to get cod to come back. And so they haven't been commercially available since then. But maybe in another 20 or 30 years, we might get some commercially available cod back. Two of my favorite fish, this is called a leatherside chub. I am famous among like 3 people because I know more about leatherside chubs than almost anybody. And there are about 3 people that care about that, and 2 of them are here tonight. And the leather-side chubs, however, we've been studying those for some time, just working on conservation. How do you preserve fish? We know that fish don't do well if you take all the water out of the stream. They seem to not work with that. And so we have a paper, my postdoc Jeff Westner, who's here, we have a paper that is back for review that looks at how leather-side chub can help become indicators for healthy streams. And we've analyzed that and looked at the data. And so these fish, even though they're about this big, they're poorly known, and you probably could go your whole life and not know what a leather-side chub is. It'd be your loss, but you could. But this is one of the things that can help us understand how better to preserve our aquatic systems, especially in the West. And finally, one of my other favorite fishes, the June sucker. June suckers are endemic to Utah Lake. They occur only there. They are a lake sucker, and so rather than feeding on the bottom, you know this thing that says you are what you eat. This is sort of true of fish. So when you get that fish in the middle of the summer and it tastes kind of muddy, that's because it's been slurping up a bunch of stuff off the bottom. And there's 2 species of suckers in Utah Lake. This is the Utah sucker, maybe appropriately named, and here is the June sucker. And notice the difference, especially in the lips here. These are big fleshy lips that are good for sealing off and pulling mud in and sorting out invertebrates. These are very thin lips, beautiful thin lips, and these fishes have a relatively large mouth, and they sort out zooplankton out of the water column, and apparently they taste really good. Because in the early part of when the pioneers, the Mormon pioneers came to this area, in that lake there were not only lots of June suckers that spawned every June, hence the name, but there were large cutthroat trout, a now extinct subspecies of Utah Lake cutthroat trout that got up to 30 pounds. Okay, that will make some of you salivate a bit. And those 2 species especially were important because they could catch them in nets, they could salt them and pickle them and send them around. And so especially during the famine of 1855-56, when Lorenzo Snow before him, Wilford Woodruff said, if any of you gentlemen want one of my wives, come and get them, because I don't have any food to feed them. It got pretty bad there, right? Maybe tongue-in-cheek, but that's what he said. And he said that they called people in the Provo area to go down and fish for 3 months. I was like, I'll sign up for that calling, you bet. You could go down, they were called fishing wards because everybody, their calling in the ward, in the church, was to go down and fish for 3 months and catch these fish and distribute them throughout the church. And it is because of this fish, the June sucker, and the cutthroat trout that we fished to extinction, those 2 in large part saved us. So if you have pioneer heritage, and you can count some of those people as your descendants, then you should be very grateful to June suckers because you are here partly because of them, right? And so it always puzzles me when I hear people in the newspaper saying, the darn June sucker, why should we preserve a trash fish like that? And I think you don't know your history, right? You don't understand how indebted you are to these beautiful fish. You may not think they're beautiful, but they are, right? The more you look at them, the more beautiful. So if we did justice where it was due, instead of the Eagle Gate Monument or the Seagull Monument, we would have, I can see it now, the cutthroat trout June sucker arch, right? And you could drive under it, and all the time you could say, thank you for preserving us with these wonderful fishes. And so, whether you look at fishes from the perspective of their wonderful adaptations or the things that they do for us now or have done for us in the past, then they do in fact provide a lifetime of days that are just packed with learning about the glory and the beauty, the endless forms most beautiful, as it was said. And so if you can, with fishes, you can have a lifetime of days. Here we are off the coast of Costa Rica with a student that I'm mentoring. Notice how good I'm mentoring here. And this is an amberjack I caught, and Dustin caught this grouper. We ate this one. It was very good. And if my life had, at certain times, if I had been exposed to other things, I might have chosen a different group, because The real story here is that you can choose any group you want, even lichens, I have decided, and other things, and you can find a lifetime of days of enjoyment and excitement out of those. So these are burying beetles. I'm doing lots of research with burying beetles. They sniff out these little dead vertebrate carcasses and ball them up, and they raise their babies on these carcasses, and the babies beg and they feed them, and they turn out to be wonderful models for the things that I do. This is a human botfly. This is a larvae, and I was fortunate enough to get 2 of these in my back when I was down in Costa Rica. And let me tell you about botflies. You know the part where they get in your back and they eat your flesh and all that, but that's not the cool part about botflies, right? The cool part is the female botfly flies around until she can find a mosquito, a female mosquito. I don't know how she tells, but she knows, and she catches them midair while flying with 2 of her 6 legs. And then she reaches around and lays her eggs on the belly of the still alive and very gently handled female mosquito, and lays her eggs on the belly. They attach to the belly of the mosquito. Then she lets it go. And the mosquito does what mosquitoes do, and it flies around and it senses your CO2 and other things, and it comes and bites you. And when those eggs sense a warm body next to them, they hatch almost immediately, and they drop onto your skin, and they climb down either in that hole that the mosquitoes just made or in another hole, tiny eggs, and they have, notice these beautiful rings of spines around here, and they embed back there. Their tail pokes out, they breathe through their tail, their mouth reaches down, and they pick out pieces of your flesh until they get about this big, and then they pupate and emerge out, and you can go on the internet. And so, and find this, right? In 2006, I had been down to Costa Rica, and I came back, and I was teaching a class, and I had this mosquito bite, and I thought, this is an infected mosquito bite. And I'd be teaching class, and it would feel like somebody was poking a needle, and I'd be talking along, and scratching my back. And I had to go down to Chile, had to leave for Chile in 10 days after I got back from Costa Rica. And I took my wife in and said, Laura, look at this on my back and tell me what's going on there. I just can't, this mosquito bite is not healing. And she looked at it and she said, it's alive. And then she wouldn't look at it anymore. And I said, well, tell me, what does it look like? I don't know. She wouldn't look at it anymore. And then, so I, in the back of my mind, I had been down to Panama with Hal Black back in '83, and I remember learning this story about these botflies, and it started to gel. And this was about 10 o'clock at night, so I went down to the hospital emergency room. I said, I'm leaving for Chile in 2 days, and I think there's a parasite growing in my back, and you have to take it out because I've got to go, and I don't want it growing while I'm down there. And that emergency button, that they push, there's nobody else there. I saw her reaching toward that. I said, no, really. Okay, come back and have a seat. You know how they do this, right? And so she said, have a seat, and I sat down. Nobody else in the emergency room. The doctor comes in and says, so you got something growing in your back? Yes, I do. I'll take a look at it. Okay. All the time, he didn't believe you, right? He's going out looking at his Boy Scout handbook. And so he came in, and I said, I just need you can see those 2 little holes? I just need you to cut them open and I think there's something in there. Well, I'll cut on you if you want to. Fine, cut on me. And so he deadened it up, and he cut. Oh, I don't seem to, wait. And he pulls out one of these beautiful things here. And I said, I want that, right? So they're actually in the museum here. Riley took them and put them in the museum for me. They have my name on them, I'm just so proud of this. And so those things, and then he finds the other one, and the whole staff is gathered around, and when he pulls it out, there's just this sound. Now talk about a lifetime of days. Some experiences you can buy, but some are just priceless, as they say, right? And that's the way it was. That's what I felt. This is a picture of where we adopted this little girl from Ghana. We're leaving on the 26th to go back over, and finally, if the U.S. Embassy gets their act together, we get to bring her home. And we were walking home one night from the restaurant, about 1.5 miles back to the thing. It was just at dusk. And I look up, and here's a cool bird, a big bird, about this big. And I looked at it, and I thought, no, that's not a bird. I know what this is. These were giant bats things I had wanted to see my whole life. And there they were, flying over in the thousands. And I was looking up, looking at these and saying, there they are. I've always wanted to see the giant bats. I've seen lots of bats, but the big ones, right? And there they were flying over, and I stopped and I talked to some of the people, and I said, look at these bats. They said, yeah, we know all about those bats. See, they had seen them. It wasn't cool to them, but it was great. Talk about a day, right? That made my day, just like the botflies made my day, and like burying beetles. And so you can have a lifetime of days packed with enjoyment and appreciation with almost anything in the natural world, because the forms are endless. The variety is there, and it's there mostly to please the eye and gladden the heart. And I'll leave that with you. Thanks.